I found a box of letters buried behind my childhood home. I never told anyone this, but I think someone watched me for most of my life, and I only found out because of a box buried in our backyard. It happened last fall. My mom was finally moving out of our old house, the one tucked away behind the woods off Mill Creek Road. She'd lived there for nearly 30 years. I grew up there. So when she called and asked me to help clear out the shed, I drove down without hesitation. The yard felt smaller than I remembered. The swing set was still there, though rusted through. The air smelled the same, damp leaves and old pine needles. Time hadn't really touched it somehow, but something about being there set my nerves on edge. As I pulled weeds behind the shed, I saw it, just under a layer of moss and brittle ivy. A plastic lid, warped, yellowed by time, like it used to belong to an old cooler. I don't know what made me dig it out. Curiosity, maybe, or some faint sense of recognition. It was a plastic storage container, sealed but stained from years underground. I popped the lid off. Inside were envelopes. Dozens of them. Carefully stacked, tied together with string. Most of them were addressed to me. At first, I thought maybe it was something I did as a kid, a time capsule or some game I'd forgotten. But then I opened one, and I stopped breathing. Hi. I saw you at the park today. You were wearing the red hat again. It looks really cool on you. I think we could be best friends. The handwriting was messy, childlike, but the tone, something about it, was off. Like it was mimicking how kids talk, but written by someone older. And it wasn't from me. It was to me. And whoever wrote it had been watching me closely. The next letter mentioned my third-grade teacher by name, the brand of chips in my lunchbox, the toy I'd buried near the fence that no one else knew about. How could they have known? At first, I laughed, nervously. Maybe it was a childhood friend. Someone who'd moved away. A neighbor kid who was just shy. But the dates? The postmarks were from the late 90s into the early 2000s. And as I flipped through them, the tone started to change. The earlier letters felt harmless in a weird way. Like someone lonely trying to connect. But then I got to the ones from 2001, 2002, and everything shifted. You cried today? I didn't like that the boy on the bus pushed you. I almost said something. But I didn't. I think I'll talk to him soon. I read it twice. Then a third time. There was no return address. Just the words, to my friend, on every envelope. You didn't come to the park. I waited for 4 hours. It's okay. I still love you. I watched you rake the leaves today. Your mom yelled at you for breaking the rake. She always yells too much. I don't like her. Some letters had little drawings. Crude stick figures. One was of a house, our house, with a figure standing outside the bedroom window. My window. The only window on the second floor. That's when I remembered something. When I was 8, I had this vivid dream. Or I thought it was a dream. I woke up one night to see someone standing outside my window. Tall. Still. I remember crying, screaming for my mom. She told me it was just a shadow, that I'd imagined it. But now I wasn't so sure. I flipped through more letters faster now. My hands were shaking. Toward the bottom of the box, something slipped out. A photo. A grainy, overexposed snapshot of our backyard. You could see the back porch light on. And in the lower corner, a small figure. It was me, sitting on the swing. Alone. The timestamp said October 1999. I was 7. Another photo. Me, walking down our driveway. Another, me asleep in bed. Curtains drawn back. Flash reflected in the glass. I almost threw up. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room staring at the box. trying to make sense of it. Was it a stalker? Some local freak? How had no one noticed? The next morning, I showed it to my mom. She stared at the letters without speaking, just flipping through slowly, eyes unreadable. Then she said something I'll never forget. You remember when you got lost in the woods? You remember when you got lost in the woods? I nodded slowly. I was 6. It was a huge deal. Cops, search parties, the whole neighborhood combing the trees behind our house. They found me nearly a full day later, curled up under an old pine. I remember waking up cold, confused, with a nosebleed. At the time, everyone told me I'd wandered off, got turned around. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? But my mom just kept staring at the box. And then she said, "You didn't wander off. You were taken." My chest tightened. They told me not to say anything. The sheriff said you'd forget, that you were too young to understand. But you were gone for almost 8 hours. And then they found you just sitting there, calm, like someone left you there on purpose. The world felt like it shifted sideways, like the floor tilted just slightly under my feet. I thought it was over, she said. I really did. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My thoughts were spinning too fast. I took the letters and the photos to the police. They opened a case, collected everything, said they'd look into it. I haven't heard anything since. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. None of the letters were dated past 2005, except one, taped to the underside of the lid. I didn't see it at first. No envelope, just a folded sheet of paper, yellowed and stiff. It read, "You forgot me, but I didn't forget you. You're grown now. I wonder if you still wear that red hat. I buried this for you to find. I knew you'd come back eventually. I've been so patient. See you soon." There was no name, just a symbol, 3 dots in a triangle. I moved into a new apartment 2 weeks later. Different city, different state, no forwarding address. I don't even use my real name on mail anymore. But sometimes, I'll be walking down the street, or sitting in a cafe, and I'll get that feeling, the one you can't explain, that someone's eyes are on you. And every time I wonder, did I ever really escape?
They said the sleep chamber was safe. They lied. They said it wasn't dangerous. Just a long-form cognitive endurance study. That's how they phrased it in the recruitment ad. No mention of isolation. No mention of the chamber. Definitely no mention of the dreams. I signed up because I needed the money. I just lost my job. Rent was overdue. And $4,000 for 2 weeks of monitored sleep sounded like a miracle. The lab was in upstate New York, remote, government-owned, but privately run. They called it the Somno Research Institute. Sounded official. The building itself was buried half underground, like a Cold War bunker with no windows and fluorescent lights that buzzed just a little too loud. There were 5 of us in the group. All men. All around my age, late 20s to early 30s. None of us knew each other beforehand. We were told that was intentional, to avoid emotional cross-contamination. Before it began, we were interviewed separately. Do you sleep well? Do you dream often? Any history of trauma, mental illness, hallucinations? I answered honestly, I dream sometimes, nothing weird. No trauma. I was clean. They gave each of us our own sleep pod. That's what they called it, but it looked more like a cryo chamber from a sci-fi movie. Smooth white walls, rounded corners, no windows. Just a padded cot, a vent in the ceiling, and cameras in each corner. We weren't allowed to bring phones or books. Just ourselves. The rule was simple, stay inside the pod for 12 days. No leaving. Food would be delivered through a slot. Lights would dim at night to simulate circadian rhythm. We could speak to the researchers via intercom, but they wouldn't respond unless it was urgent. The first day was fine. Boring, but fine. I slept a lot. Ate when food came. There was a faint humming in the walls, like machinery buried deep behind the surface, but I tuned it out. On day 2, I started dreaming. I remember the first one vividly. I was standing in a hallway made of concrete. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like flies. There was a door at the end of the corridor, and I knew, somehow, I was never supposed to open it. But I did. Inside was something. Not a person. Not quite. It stood too still. Its face had no features, just a blur, like someone had wiped it away. And though it never moved, I felt it watching me. Like it was waiting. I woke up gasping. Heart pounding. Cold sweat. I called through the intercom, but no one answered. I told myself it was stress. My brain adjusting to the environment. Perfectly normal. That night, I had the same dream again. Only this time, the figure was closer. By day 4, something had shifted. I couldn't tell time anymore. The chamber lights followed a schedule, sure, bright for 16 hours, dim for 8, but time felt stretchy. Like each hour took longer than the last. I wasn't sure if I was sleeping too much or not at all. The dreams kept returning. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself back in that concrete hallway. Same flickering lights. Same humming. Same door. And the thing behind it. Each night, it got a little closer. Still unmoving. Still silent. But undeniably closer. I tried asking the researchers if this was part of the study. No answer. I begged for music, a book, anything to break the monotony. Nothing. Just the mechanical voice every morning, vitals within normal range. Continue rest cycle. I started talking to the others through the walls. Tapping patterns. 1 knock 4, yes, 2 4, no, I don't even know how we agreed on that, it just sort of happened. A shared desperation, maybe. One guy, I think his name was Owen, started tapping every few hours. Morse code, maybe. I didn't understand it. One night, he tapped 5 fast knocks. Then silence. I never heard him again. On day 6, the door in my dream was open. I didn't remember opening it this time. I was just inside. The room was pitch black. I couldn't see the walls or floor. Just that same figure, standing there. It was taller now. And I swear I could hear it breathing, not with ears, but somewhere inside my skull. A slow, wet inhale. Then another. I screamed myself awake. This time, the lights in the chamber were still dim. Night mode. I crawled to the wall and begged through the intercom. Nothing. But then, just as I was about to give up, I heard a voice. Faint. Not through the speaker, from inside the chamber. He's almost here. I froze. Pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. I convinced myself I imagined it. Sleep deprivation. Hallucination. But in the next food tray, they'd given me a pill, unmarked, white, no explanation. I didn't take it. The next day, I noticed something new, the humming in the walls had stopped. Now there was just silence. Absolute, crushing silence. I tried tapping to the others. No response. No knocks. No movement. Like I was the only one left. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that face, or rather, the absence of one, hovering in the dark. Still. Waiting. And then, on day 7, I woke up to find something written on the inside of the chamber door. You brought him. I stared at it for hours. I hadn't written it. I don't even know how anyone could have. The inside walls were smooth, seamless. No pens. No tools. Just me. I started screaming. Banging on the walls. Begging to be let out. The light stayed dim. No voice came. And I swear, just before I passed out from exhaustion, I saw the camera in the corner shift slightly. As if someone was finally watching again. I don't know exactly when I lost track of time. After day 7, if it even was day 7, the structure of everything fell apart. The lights stopped cycling. They stayed dim, a perpetual twilight that left no clear sense of day or night. I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming anymore. Sometimes I'd blink and find myself standing. Other times I'd swear I hadn't moved for hours, only to discover the tray slot had been opened and closed again without me noticing. I started hearing whispers. Not in the walls, inside my own head. He's here now. You opened the door. I scratched the words into the padding with my nails. Repeated phrases. Names I didn't recognize. One night I woke up with blood under my fingernails and the name Owen written on my forearm. I don't remember doing it. Then came the blackout. I was sitting against the wall, rocking, trying to hum to myself, anything to drown out the silence, when everything just cut out. The lights. The air vent. Total darkness. Total stillness. I thought, this is it. I thought, they're shutting it down. But no one came. I lay there for what felt like days. No food. No sound. I think I slept. I think I dreamed, but not of the hallway this time. This time, I was outside the chamber. Watching myself. From above. I saw myself curled up in the corner, thinner, eyes wild, lips moving without sound. I saw the door slowly open, not with a hiss or a click, but with a slow, wet stretch, like something organic giving way. Something stepped in. I didn't see its face, only the shadow. But I felt it again. That same pressure in the skull. Like a thought that wasn't mine, crawling behind my eyes. Then I blinked, and I was back in my body. Alone. Lights still off. Mouth dry. I crawled to the door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Until, a soft click. The door creaked open. I don't remember running. Just the cold concrete under my feet, the maze of corridors, the blaring emergency lights. Everything pulsed red. No staff. No other test subjects. Just empty halls. I burst through a stairwell, clawed my way up to the surface, and collapsed into the trees beyond the compound. The sun burned my eyes. I don't know how long I was gone. They never filed a report. No police followed up. The facility was listed under a fake name. Even the NDA I signed disappeared from my email. Like it never existed. But here's the part one can't explain. 2 weeks ago, I was walking past a storefront near my apartment. A furniture showroom. Big glass windows. Nothing unusual. Except, inside, between the armchairs and lamps, was something white and smooth. Rounded. Seamless. A chamber. Just like the one I was in. And standing next to it, a man in a black polo. Clipboard in hand. Smiling at a young couple as he said, "It's completely safe. The whole process is monitored. You'll barely notice the time pass." I didn't move. I didn't blink. The man looked up. And for just a second. I swear he had no face.
My father never left that house on Brownsville Road. I hadn't set foot in that house since the day we buried my mother. It's strange how a place can hold its breath when you're gone. Like it's been waiting, watching. The house on Brownsville Road always felt too still. even when I was a kid. The air inside carried a kind of weight. My dad used to call it spiritual tension. Said it had something to do with the land. Said he felt it the day they moved in. As a teenager, I thought it was just one of his weird obsessions. My father was deeply Catholic. Not just church on Sundays Catholic, but incense burning, Latin chanting, prayer room in the basement Catholic. He believed in spiritual warfare. Said evil wasn't just metaphor, it was real and it had geography. Growing up in that house meant living under constant watch. If I had nightmares, he'd sprinkle holy water over my bed. If I talked back, he'd make me kneel and pray the pride away. My mother went along with it for years, until she stopped. Quietly, she pulled away, stopped coming to Mass, started sleeping in the guest room. By the time I left for college, the house felt like a tomb. But I came back this year, only because I had to. Dad had been declining since the funeral. Early signs of dementia, the doctors said. Some confusion, maybe mild paranoia. I wasn't surprised. He was in his 70s and had been alone in that house for 2 years. But when I walked through the front door again, something felt off. The air was heavy, thick, like the humidity after a thunderstorm, except the walls were dry. The house smelled like candles and dust and something faintly metallic, like old coins. Dad looked worse than I expected. Thin, pale, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept. He greeted me like nothing was wrong. "You finally came back," he said. "It's waking up again." I asked what he meant. He just smiled and walked away. The first night, I heard footsteps on the floorboards above my room. Slow, deliberate. Problem is, the room above mine had been sealed off for years. After Mom died, he locked it and never reopened it. When I mentioned it the next morning, he looked at me sharply and said, "Don't go in there. That's not for you." I laughed. "It's just a room, Dad." His face changed, like something behind his eyes switched off. "That's where it talks to me." That sentence echoed in my head all day. That's where it talks to me. I wanted to believe he meant it metaphorically, the way lonely people personify places. But there was no warmth in his voice, no poetry, just quiet certainty. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening for the steps. At exactly 3:13 a.m., they started again. For steps, a pause, then 3 more. Not pacing, just movement, like someone adjusting their position. Standing watch. I got up and went into the hall. The door to the upstairs room was still shut. The old padlock he'd installed after Mom died was still in place. I should have left it alone. The next morning, I went looking for coffee and found something strange on the kitchen table. A composition notebook, the kind I hadn't seen since high school. My name was written on the cover in my mother's handwriting. Inside were journal entries, dated from her last few years in the house. Most were mundane lists, recipes, occasional notes about gardening. But near the end, the tone changed. "He hears voices in the walls now, says they speak Latin. I've heard nothing. I found him praying at 4 a.m. in the crawlspace again. He was bleeding from the palms. He believes something is buried under the house. Something old. Something waiting." Then, in the final entry, just one line. "If anything happens to me, don't let him stay here alone." My stomach dropped. When I confronted him, he denied everything. Said Mom made it all up. Said she had a weak faith and the house could smell it. "This place," he told me, "demands attention. If you ignore it, it takes things." I thought about the sealed room, about the way he spoke to corners when he thought I wasn't looking. That night, I picked the lock. The air inside was stale, like it hadn't moved in years. The room was nearly empty, just a single wooden chair facing the window. A rosary, frayed and dark, hung from the ceiling above it. And on the floor, burned into the wood, was a blackened circle, scorched clean through the varnish. In the far corner, an old tape recorder. I pressed play. The voice that came through wasn't my father's. It was deeper, rhythmic, repeating something over and over in a language I didn't recognize. Then a pause. Then breathing. Wet, slow, animal-like breathing. And then, almost a whisper. "He gave you to me." I dropped the recorder. backed away. But before I could leave, I heard creaking behind me. The sound of someone shifting weight on old floorboards. I turned, but the room was empty. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed on the couch with the lights on, the recorder locked in my bag. Every sound the house made, settling wood, the hiss of the old pipes, felt intentional, like it was listening back. By morning, my father was already awake, sitting in the dining room in his robe, staring at nothing. I sat across from him and placed the recorder on the table. "I heard it," I said. "I know what you've been doing up there." He didn't flinch, just looked down at his hands. "Your mother was afraid of the wrong thing," he said. "She thought it was in the house. But it's not in the house. It is the house." He told me things I wish I could forget. About voices that came in the walls. About dreams that weren't his but showed him things. Images of violence, rituals, something ancient. Something buried. He said he tried to fight it. That's why he kept the room locked, the circle intact. Said he fasted, bled, prayed. But it wasn't enough. "You don't fight a house," he said. "You live with it. Or it lives with you." He said it had chosen him, that when I was born it wanted me instead, but he'd made a deal. Given it something. I asked him what. He just smiled and said, "Time." That night I dreamt of the room. I was back inside it, standing in the blackened circle. But the window was gone. The walls stretched upward, endlessly. Hanging from the ceiling were dozens of rosaries, swaying without wind. And in the corner, my father. Only he was younger, the way I remembered him as a child. Kneeling, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then he looked up at me and said, "It's your turn." I woke with a jolt, but not in bed. I was in the upstairs room, alone. The recorder was on the floor beside me, still running. The black circle beneath me was warm. I left the next morning, drove 8 hours without stopping. I never told anyone what happened. Not the police, not friends. I didn't go back for the funeral when my father died 3 weeks later. Didn't claim the house. Left everything behind. But a few months ago I got a letter. No return address. Just a photograph. It was the house. The window to the upstairs room. And in the corner of the frame, behind the glass, barely visible, my father. Still sitting. Still watching.